Hello! Today we're going to draw a camping scene. IbisPaintx, or Ibix, is a free drawing app for Android. They made some changes recently, like the watermark, but that's okay, it's still free. And it has a lot of brushes, you just have to watch an ad. Let's get started by sketching some mountains, water, a tree, and a tent. I think I used the texture brush, but it doesn't matter what you use to sketch. I also knew that I wanted a campfire. Then I used the acrylic mix 2 brush for the sky and tried to make a gradient. And then I used the dip pen hard and tried drawing some mountains, but I didn't really like them. I clipped a new layer on top and changed them to green, but I don't know, it wasn't working. So I tried to draw the grassy area in the front first. I used the dip pen hard for the line and then fill it in with the felt tip hard brush because it's bigger. I filled in the lake area and then drew the tent. I used the ruler tool to draw the poles and tried to make it look like it could really hold up a cloth for a tent. And then I drew the tree. I was just trying to block in the colors, but I ended up keeping a lot of it the way it was. So for the campfire, there are 3 layers of the wood pieces, and then each flame color is a separate layer for animating. Then I decided to try hills instead of mountains, and I tried grayer shades of the same green. Perspective is hard. Then I clipped a layer on top of the hill layers and used the acrylic mix 2 brush to make some grassy like textures. And then the same thing for the water. And then on top of the water, I tried different brushes to make lines, and then I smudged and blurred them to make it look like water. I used one of the flat brushes to make more grassy textures. Some have like pointed ends to the stroke, so I picked one that was more flat and square to make it look like tall grass blades. And I tried to go light to darker in the front. I did the same thing but with a smaller brush size for the background hills. I duplicated the sky layer and then I used the perspective tool to move it up so that the lighter blue part would be seen behind the hills. Okay, so then the tree. I tried a couple of different things. So first I used probably the oil hairbrush for the bark. I usually do that and then sometimes smudge and blur, depending on how much bark is supposed to be there. Then I tried that for the leaves with a smaller size, but it needed to be like fluffier instead of streaky. So I took a break from that and drew some individual grass blades with the dip pen hard. Then I used the felt tip pen hard to make some small circles to be flowers. They're supposed to be lavender flowers. Then I went back to the tent poles. I used the felt tip pen hard so the ends would be rounded. Definitely it's easier with the ruler tool, so you can move it around and get the right angle. I drew the tent curtain flap, the door part, with a slightly darker blue shade. I did some very light shading along the edges of the tent cloth with the airbrush normal. Then I used one of the other airbrush brushes with a harder edge to shade one side of each pole. There are 3 layers of poles so that I could shade them individually more easily. And then I got a little stuck with the 4th ground pole. Like, I knew it would have a 4th pole if it was a real tent, but I got confused with the angle that it should be. But it's the same as the front one. I used the special liquefy tool to sort of move the edges of the hills so it would not be a smooth edge and look more natural. I used a different green color to add some more grass textures to the hills, just for some more something. Then the water. So I shaded the edge of the grass layer so it would look like it had an edge to it where the grass meets the water. I don't know, it helped a little bit. I added some more flat brush grasses to the foreground to make the front area look more defined, and tiny strokes in the way back behind the tree. Then I went back to the firewood. I used the oil hairbrush with a darker brown. I smudged and blurred it just a little bit, like where the fire would be reflecting, so it would be a little lighter brown there. I drew many layers of fire with different shades of yellow, orange, and red. A few layers had shading with 2 colors, but I ended up not using those ones. I think I forgot that I made them. So here we're just making extra fire layers that won't get used. And then I was playing around a little bit with the FX filters. I think I tried the bevel and the one that makes an edge. There are 81 different filters, I think, so I just try stuff. But always remember to duplicate the layer just in case you can't get the filter off. And then you have your original layer still usable. I moved the top pole up a little bit so it would look like the other poles were holding it for the tent. I used the same filter on each layer for the poles, and I used the relief filter on the lavender flowers on the circles layer so they would look more 3D. Then I decided the faraway hill needed more grasses and to be a little bit greener, so I added more grasses, and then the same for the front hill with a slightly lighter and brighter green so it would look like the sun is shining. Then I made it a little darker at the bottom of the hill and a little brighter on the front grass layer. Just making the edges a little bit darker so it would look like hills and front grasses. I lightened the sky a little bit. I changed the sky many times, partly for animations for later, partly just to make it look different than the water. I rotated the clipped layer of leaves so the strokes would be horizontal instead of vertical. It kind of looks more like leaves. I intended to come back and draw actual leaves, but I didn't. Then I tried the FX relief filter on the tree and the water drop filter so it would have light reflecting. And I used the relief filter on the leaves. I used the relief filter on the firewood also. And then I merged the tree layers and duplicated it for a second tree. I used the transform mesh tool to kind of change the shape of the tree so it would look like a different tree. And I used the hue shifter to make it a little darker. I used the flat brush again with a lighter green to add some more grass textures. Remember to move your large objects when adding grasses so you don't forget to put grasses in the middle. And then I used the same brush with a darker green to add more grasses. And again with lighter shades of green. This whole piece probably took around 8 hours to draw, and I think it has 111 layers. But in the layer menu there's an option to save layer as transparent image, and that really helps. But you can also save as transparent for whatever's currently visible. Just add more grasses, darker and bigger in the front and smaller and lighter in the back. Then I wanted to redraw the stems and leaves for the lavender plants. I tried a few times and then I just drew leaves on top of what was already drawn. I used a darker purple and added more circle flowers and used the relief and water drop filter so they would look round and lighter at the top. You can move the light source around in the water drop filter. Okay, and then back to the water. I repeated the same strategy of different brushes and then smudge and blur. I used flat brushes, the oil hair brush, and the airbrush with a very small radius, and probably the acrylic mix 2 brush. I don't know, I just try stuff until it looks close to how I wanted it to look. It kind of looks like water. Then many days later I came back and added some leaf-like textures to the tree. I probably used the texture brush or the splatter brush, so it's a bunch of little dots for leaves. And then I duplicated it and used the transform mesh tool to change the shape a little. You can use the special liquify tool for that also, but it kind of sometimes makes the edges look blurry. Like the farthest away hill, it's not really a smooth edge anymore. But with the transform mesh tool, it keeps the edges the same. It just moves them. And then I did the same thing again and made a third tree. I wanted a little bit more texture on the front tree, so I used the splatter brush one with a light brown and then smudged and blurred it. I merged the flower layers and duplicated them and then moved them around just to have more flowers quickly. I changed the sky again, and then it was time for Penguin. I had 2 layers from when Penguin carried the cornucopia, so I imported them separately. And then I messed with the water again for a little bit. It's not the water that looks weird, it's the perspective of the water that's weird, but that's okay. Then I changed Penguin's arms layer so his arms were out and not holding something. And I drew a blue shirt for him. I used the symmetry ruler tool just to make it easier. Then I tried to edit Penguin's shape so he could wear his clothes better. And then I looked at a reference photo and decided to just redraw him with more of a penguin shape. I used a flannel cloth material. There are tons of materials that you can use. Some are premium, but most are free. So after I redrew his shape again and his face, I clipped the flannel material to the shirt layer, and now he's wearing flannel. Then I made like the edges of the shirt and the collar like darker. So I duplicated the flannel layer and drew a new layer with the edges, and then clipped the new flannel layer and used the FX hue shifter to make it darker. So it looks like a collar and where the shirt buttons. And then I drew buttons with the felt tip pen hard so they would be round. I think I used the relief filter and maybe the chrome filter on the buttons, but they're so small, it doesn't really matter. And then I drew some pants and did the same thing with the jeans material. And then I drew a hat for him, a little fisherman's hat since he's camping. I really tried to make it look like a real hat. I even erased the holes and tried to make the little metal circles. And there's Penguin wearing flannel. I merged that all to one layer and moved him behind the tent. Then I tried again to darken the edges of the grass layer by the water. I spent a lot of time reworking the water, but that's okay. Then we needed a way for Penguin to get to the campsite, so I moved the symmetry tool over to the water and drew a canoe and an oar that I duplicated, mirrored, and then moved. I didn't do a lot of detail on the canoe, I just airbrush shaded the edges a little bit. And then I had too many layers of the grasses and stems and leaves and flowers, so I reorganized them a little bit so that I could have just one layer of the flowers. And there's Penguin camping. And here is the little animation that I made using both DaVinci Resolve and Canva. Thanks for watching. Have a happy day.